The boardroom was built to intimidate. Glass walls framed the city like a trophy. The long table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the skyline upside down. Soft, recessed lights glowed against brushed steel. The air carried a faint trace of expensive perfume and lemon wood polish. Evelyn Carter stood at the head of the table, spine straight, palms resting lightly against the cool glass surface. At 35, she had mastered rooms like this. Investors feared her precision. Executives admired her restraint. She rarely hesitated. She never trembled. Until now. Across from her stood a man in a worn jacket that still held the scent of warehouse dust and detergent. His hands were rough, knuckles pale from years of lifting crates and tightening bolts. Beside him stood a little girl clutching a faded pink backpack with a broken zipper carefully stitched back into place. The girl looked up, and the room shifted. Evelyn's breath caught, barely audible beneath the low hum of the air conditioning. The child's dark, almond-shaped eyes held the same quiet intensity, the same subtle curve in the brow, the same small birthmark near the collarbone, half hidden beneath the edge of a cotton dress. It was not resemblance. It was recognition. A pen slipped from someone's hand and tapped softly against the glass table. No one bent to retrieve it. Evelyn felt the ground tilt beneath her polished heels. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady for a heartbeat before it fractured. "Does your daughter look exactly like me?" The question cracked through the boardroom like thunder over still water. The man did not flinch. Daniel Harper tightened his grip on his daughter's hand, not possessive, but protective. Lily's fingers curled into his calloused palm. Her skin was warm, steady, trusting. Around them, executives shifted in their seats. The faint rustle of tailored suits sounded too loud in the silence. A distant elevator chimed somewhere beyond the frosted doors. The world outside the glass walls continued moving, unaware that something irreversible had just begun. Daniel had never imagined stepping into a skyscraper like this one. The marble floors downstairs had gleamed beneath his scuffed shoes. The scent of wealth had clung to the air like something invisible but undeniable. He had felt out of place from the moment the security badge was clipped to his jacket. But he did not feel small. He felt ready. Lily had entered the building with wide eyes, fascinated by the mirrored elevators and the way her reflection multiplied in the polished walls. She had tugged his sleeve and whispered that the place looked like the inside of a crystal. Daniel had smiled then. Now, that smile was gone. Evelyn's gaze did not leave the child's face. Her chest rose and fell in measured rhythm, but something behind her composure was unraveling thread by thread. 7 years of discipline, 7 years of silence. She had built an empire from loss, from pressure, from expectations that never loosened their grip. After her parents passed, she had turned grief into fuel. Boardrooms replaced family dinners. Quarterly reports replaced birthdays. Control had been her survival, and this child standing under the soft white lights threatened that control with a single glance. Lily shifted her weight slightly, the strap of her backpack creaking faintly. She tilted her head to the left as she studied Evelyn, curious but unafraid. The movement mirrored Evelyn's own unconscious gesture. A flicker, a breath, a memory pressing against a locked door. Daniel felt the room waiting for him. The polished table, the silent executives, the woman at the head, who carried authority like a tailored suit. He inhaled slowly, catching the faint scent of polished wood and something floral. He could hear Lily's breathing beside him, steady, uncertain. He had known someday questions might come. He had known Lily did not share his features. Teachers had noticed. Strangers had stared a moment too long. He had always answered gently, deflected politely. But this was different. This was not curiosity. This was recognition sharpened by power. Evelyn stepped away from the head of the table without realizing she had moved. The click of her heels echoed softly against the floor. She stopped a few feet from Lily, close enough to see the fine strands of dark hair brushing against the child's cheek. Her eyes lowered. The birthmark. Small, faint, exactly where hers had been at that age. Her fingers trembled, barely visible, before she clasped them together. "Answer me," she said again, softer now. Not as a command, as a plea. The room seemed to contract, glass walls pressing inward. Daniel felt Lily's hand squeeze his. He bent slightly, bringing himself closer to her height. His voice, when it came, was calm. 7 years ago, he began. The hum of the air conditioning filled the pause. On a stormy night. Outside, a cloud drifted across the sun, dimming the boardroom in a passing shadow. Evelyn's composure cracked just enough for something human to surface in her eyes. Daniel lifted his gaze to meet hers, and the truth, long buried beneath rain and regret, began to rise. 7 years ago, Daniel said quietly, his voice steady against the stillness. I was driving nights. The words settled into the room like dust in sunlight. A storm rolled in out of nowhere, the kind that turns the streets into rivers. He could almost hear it again, rain striking metal, tires hissing over flooded pavement, thunder shaking the frame of his old taxi. I had just dropped off my last passenger, he continued. I was about to head home. Lily stayed close to him, her fingers laced with his. The faint scent of fabric softener clung to her dress. The backpack at her shoulder sagged slightly, the stitched zipper catching the light. When I heard something, he paused, a sound that didn't belong. Across from him, Evelyn's jaw tightened. She did not interrupt. It was crying, Daniel said, soft, almost swallowed by the rain. A faint hum from the ceiling vents filled the space between his words. I thought maybe someone had left a window open, or maybe a stray animal got inside. He swallowed once. I opened the back door. The memory shifted in his eyes, streetlight flickering, water dripping from his coat, cold air biting at his face. There was a baby. The word seemed to press the oxygen out of the room. Wrapped in a pink blanket, so small she barely made a sound. Lily glanced up at him, sensing the weight in his tone. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. She was warm, he said softly, but shaking. Evelyn's breath grew shallow. There was no bag, no paperwork, no note. His gaze lifted, meeting hers. Just a silver bracelet. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. It was tiny, Daniel continued, loose on her wrist, engraved with a single letter. He did not need to say it immediately. Silence stretched. The letter E. A faint intake of breath rippled through the executives seated along the table. Evelyn felt something sharp move through her chest. Daniel's voice remained even. I drove straight to the police station. He could still see the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of wet pavement clinging to his shoes as he stepped inside. I reported everything. The time, the location, the condition of the baby. He glanced down briefly, as if seeing it again. They logged the bracelet as evidence, photographed it, filed an intake report. Evelyn's mind flashed white hospital walls, paperwork sliding across metal trays, a newborn's faint cry echoing against tile. I visited the hospital every day after that, Daniel said. At first, I told myself it was just to check if someone had come forward. His thumb brushed lightly over Lily's knuckles. But no one did. The air conditioning hummed steadily, indifferent to the fracture unfolding in the room. Days turned into weeks, he continued. The baby stayed unnamed in the system, just another case number. Evelyn's throat tightened at the word unnamed. She'd grip my finger when I leaned over the crib, Daniel said, like she already knew me. Lily's grip tightened instinctively, as if echoing a memory her body carried without words. The social worker told me they were still searching, he went on. Checking missing person reports, hospital logs. Nothing matched. A faint tremor entered Evelyn's breathing. Eventually, the state classified her as abandoned. The word fell heavy. I asked what would happen next. He already knew the answer then, even before they said it. Foster care, placement, temporary homes. His jaw set slightly. I couldn't let that happen. The executives shifted in their chairs, the soft scrape of leather against wood punctuating the quiet. I'd lost my wife 2 years earlier, Daniel said, not looking away. Complications during childbirth. Evelyn's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. I held that baby in my arms, and it felt like breathing again. The sunlight outside shifted, reflecting faintly off the table's glass surface. I started the paperwork, he said. Background checks, financial disclosures, home inspections. He gave a small, almost embarrassed shrug. I didn't have much, but I had room. Evelyn's vision blurred slightly. She blinked, steadying herself. They returned the bracelet to me after the holding period expired, Daniel added. No claims, no leads. He met her gaze directly. I kept it. The room stilled completely. Not because I was looking for someone, he said, but because it was part of her story. Lily looked between them now, confusion beginning to form in her young expression. Daniel bent slightly, so his voice remained gentle. I named her Lily. The word lingered softly. After my wife's favorite flowers. Evelyn pressed her lips together, fighting the tremor, threatening to surface. For 7 years, Daniel continued, I raised her, not as someone I found, he inhaled, but as my daughter. The faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the hallway outside seemed suddenly amplified. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. And I always knew, Daniel finished carefully, that one day someone might ask about the letter on that bracelet. Silence settled over the boardroom like a held breath. The skyline beyond the glass shimmered in afternoon light. And for the first time in 7 years, the letter E no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a reckoning. Rain had not fallen that night. It had attacked. Sheets of water slammed against the windshield, blurring the city into streaks of white and red, streetlights fractured into trembling halos. The taxi's wiper dragged back and forth in frantic rhythm, rubber scraping glass with a tired squeal. Daniel remembered the smell, first wet asphalt and engine heat, metallic and sharp. He had been exhausted. Double shifts. Hospital bills still echoing from a life that no longer existed. The passenger seat beside him had felt too empty for too long. When the last fare stepped out beneath a flickering awning, Daniel exhaled and reached to turn off the meter. The cab ticked softly as it idled. Thunder rolled somewhere above the skyline. That was when he heard it. Not loud, not urgent. A sound so fragile it almost dissolved into the rain. A thin cry. He froze. The storm swallowed everything, horns, sirens, distant traffic, but the sound threaded through it, trembling and small. Daniel twisted in his seat, scanning the dark interior. Nothing. Another cry. Softer, closer. His pulse thudded once against his ribs. He stepped out into the rain, coat instantly heavy with water. It soaked through denim and cotton, ran down the back of his neck. The street lamp above flickered, casting erratic light across the pavement. He opened the rear door. The world narrowed. On the seat, tucked awkwardly against the corner, was a bundle wrapped in pale pink. The fabric was damp at the edges, but the center remained dry, carefully folded. The cry came again. Daniel leaned closer, breath catching. A newborn, so small she barely seemed real. Her tiny fists pressed against her cheeks. Her lashes were wet with tears. The blanket smelled faintly of hospital antiseptic and something softer, like baby powder. For a split second, he could not move. Memory surged, uninvited, another hospital room, another cry, another fragile life slipping away under fluorescent lights. The storm cracked overhead. The baby shuddered. Daniel reached down with shaking hands and lifted her carefully against his chest. She was warm, impossibly warm, like she carried her own small son against the cold night. She quieted almost instantly. The only thing that gleamed beneath the streetlight was a silver bracelet circling her wrist. It was too large, sliding loosely over skin no wider than his thumb. The metal caught the lightning and flashed. Engraved into the surface was a single letter, Dr. The letter looked deliberate, not random, not decorative. Intentional. Daniel glanced around the empty street. No running footsteps, no open doors, no figure watching from the shadows. Just rain. He stepped back into the driver's seat, cradling the baby in one arm while fumbling for his phone with the other. His fingers slipped against the screen. He dialed emergency services. The operator's voice crackled through static. He gave the location, the time, the condition of the child. He did not mention how his chest felt like it might split open. When he reached the police station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The building smelled of old coffee and damp coats. Officers moved briskly, efficient but detached. They took photographs, logged the bracelet, stamped paperwork with heavy, echoing thuds. The sound of ink pressing into forms felt final. The baby whimpered when placed under brighter hospital lights later that night. Nurses moved around her with careful speed. Monitors beeped softly, steady and reassuring. Daniel stood just outside the curtain, water still dripping from his sleeves. He told himself he was only waiting to make sure she was safe. That was all. But when a nurse asked if he was family, the word lodged in his throat. No, he was not family. He was just a driver who had opened a door. Yet, when the baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger for the first time, something shifted. It was not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet click inside his chest, like a lock turning. Days passed. The storm cleared, but the waiting did not. He returned to the hospital every evening after work. The hallway always smelled faintly of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. The lights never dimmed. The baby remained unnamed in official records. Female infant, the file read. No parents came forward. No missing persons reports matched. The bracelet sat sealed in an evidence bag for a mandatory holding period. Daniel had asked about it once, voice low, unsure why he cared so much. Standard procedure, the officer had replied. If no one claims it, it'll be released. Released, as if it were just an object, as if the letter carved into silver did not carry a history. Daniel would stand by the crib, watching the baby sleep. The steady rise and fall of her chest became the only rhythm that calmed him. He told himself he would step back once someone came. Someone who belonged to her. But no one came. Weeks folded into one another. The hospital lights did not soften, and each time he prepared to leave, the baby's fingers would tighten around his hand, as if she were afraid of being left again. The first time she smiled, not gas, not reflex, but a faint curve that reached her eyes. Daniel felt something break and rebuild inside him at the same time. The letter E remained unanswered, but the silence around it grew heavier. And in that quiet, beneath buzzing fluorescent lights and the steady beep of monitors, a decision began forming long before he admitted it to himself. The night her daughter was born, the city looked merciless. Hospital windows reflected steel and neon, sharp lines against the dark. Inside the private suite, everything smelled of antiseptic and polished surfaces. The sheets were crisp. The machines were quiet. The silence felt curated. Evelyn lay propped against stiff white pillows, exhaustion carved beneath her eyes. The weight of the world she had inherited pressed against her chest more heavily than the child she had just delivered. She had been 28, too young to fail, too visible to falter. The nurse placed the newborn in her arms. The baby's skin was flushed, her breathing uneven but strong. Her tiny fingers opened and closed instinctively, searching for something solid in a room that felt temporary. Evelyn stared down. The birthmark near the collarbone was faint but unmistakable. The same shape, the same place. She touched it lightly with trembling fingertips. Outside the room, phones vibrated. Assistants whispered, messages piled up unanswered. The board expected statements about the company's expansion overseas. Investors were watching quarterly numbers. Headlines waited for weakness, and she had given them none. Not when her parents died in a car accident and the company nearly collapsed with them. Not when competitors circled like predators sensing blood. She had survived by becoming sharper than grief. But this was different. This was not a hostile takeover. This was a child. The father had disappeared weeks earlier, leaving behind apologies that felt thin and hollow. He had promised support, then vanished under pressure he did not want attached to his name. Evelyn had been left alone with scandal and fear disguised as advice. You cannot afford this right now. The words had come from someone she trusted, someone close to the company, close to her family's legacy. Your authority depends on perception. She had sat in a dim office days before delivery, hands folded in her lap, listening to strategies outlined like battle plans. A temporary solution, they had assured her. Just until things stabilize. Temporary. The word had sounded reasonable in a room that smelled of leather and ambition. Now, in the hospital suite, with her daughter's breath warming her collarbone, temporary felt like betrayal already forming. She held the baby longer than she was supposed to. Long enough to memorize the weight, long enough to inhale the soft scent of newborn skin and antiseptic, long enough for guilt to begin etching itself into bone. The bracelet had been her idea. Simple, silver, engraved with one letter, not for the world, for herself. A mark of connection, proof that the child had not been erased, only hidden. When the nurse gently suggested the baby be taken for observation, Evelyn hesitated. Her grip tightened. For a moment, just a moment, she almost changed everything. But footsteps approached the door. A soft knock. Reality pressing inward. She let go. The transfer was quiet, clinical, no alarms, no raised voices. Just paperwork sliding across a counter and signatures written in controlled strokes. The baby was moved under the pretense of privacy. Evelyn remained seated in the hospital bed, hands resting empty against white sheets. She told herself it was strategic, necessary, controlled. The following weeks blurred into meetings and public appearances. Cameras flashed. Headlines praised her resilience. Analysts commented on her composure. She did not correct them. Behind closed doors, inquiries were made discreetly. The person entrusted with the arrangement claimed complications, delays, miscommunication. Then the trail dissolved. Phone calls went unanswered. Records were incomplete. The explanation shifted from temporary placement to logistical confusion, and then to nothing. Evelyn felt the shift before anyone said it aloud. The baby was gone, not relocated. Gone. She hired investigators quietly, spent money without blinking, leveraged connections without mercy. Every lead unraveled into smoke. The hospital cited sealed records. The intermediary denied responsibility. The system protected itself. Nights became unbearable. The city lights outside her penthouse windows blinked like distant warnings. The silence felt cavernous. She stood at the glass more than she slept. The nursery she had secretly prepared remained untouched. A single crib beneath a skylight, pale walls, a mobile that never spun. The bracelet's twin, the prototype she had kept before engraving, sat inside her desk drawer, cold against velvet lining. She would take it out sometimes, tracing the empty space where the letter had been carved into the one that left her hands. Her empire grew during those years. Profits rose. Acquisitions multiplied. Her public image hardened into something impenetrable. Strength, precision, detachment. No one knew that the detachment had been survival. If she allowed grief to surface, she feared it would dismantle everything she had fought to protect. So she built higher walls. Boardrooms replaced memory. Numbers replaced lullabies. But there were moments brief, unguarded, when she would see a child on a city sidewalk, holding a parent's hand, and something inside her would fracture. She never allowed it to show. The world saw a leader who trusted data over emotion. No one saw the mother who had signed a paper believing she would reclaim her child within weeks. No one saw how the betrayal hollowed her. Until now. Standing in the boardroom years later, staring into a face that mirrored her own, she understood something with painful clarity. The decision she had labeled temporary had rewritten 7 years of 2 lives. And the cost of that decision had never stopped accumulating. It had only waited. For this moment, the decision did not arrive like lightning. It settled slowly. In hospital hallways that smelled of antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. In the steady beep of monitors that marked the passing hours. In the way a tiny hand refused to release his finger even after sleep took over. Daniel told himself he was only helping. He brought small things at first. A soft blanket. A stuffed rabbit from a clearance bin. A children's book he read in a low voice beside the crib, stumbling over the brighter, happier endings. The nurses began recognizing him. "You're back," one of them said gently one evening, adjusting the baby's cap. He nodded, unsure how to explain something he barely understood himself. Paperwork began to enter the picture quietly. Background checks, income statements, home inspections, forms that asked questions about stability, space, intent. He filled them out at the small kitchen table in his apartment, the overhead bulb casting a yellow halo over scattered documents. The table wobbled slightly if he pressed too hard with the pen. He listed his job, his schedule, his savings. There was not much to list. He worked double shifts at the warehouse now, stacking crates until his shoulders burned and his palms split along old calluses. The air inside the loading dock always smelled of dust and oil. Forklifts beeped in sharp reverse warnings. Metal scraped against concrete. During breaks, he would sit alone on an overturned crate, staring at his phone screen where a single photo lived. A newborn in a hospital bassinet. Eyes closed. Peaceful. He did not notice when the word mine stopped feeling like a mistake. The social worker visited his apartment on a gray afternoon. She stood in the doorway, clipboard balanced against her forearm, eyes scanning quietly. The place was small. Worn carpet, second-hand couch, a narrow hallway that led to a bedroom he had already begun preparing. Fresh paint still clung faintly to the walls, a soft, pale yellow. The scent lingered in the air. A crib stood against the far corner, simple, sturdy, assembled carefully with instructions spread out across the floor the night before. "You understand this is permanent," the social worker said gently. Daniel did not hesitate. "Yes." The word came without tremor. The final hearing took place in a modest courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The ceiling fan rotated lazily above. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Daniel wore his cleanest shirt. His hands rested flat against his thighs to steady them. When the judge reviewed the documents, the rustle of pages sounded unbearably loud. "Are you prepared to assume full legal and financial responsibility?" the judge asked. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. "Yes." No grand speech followed, no applause, just a signature. Ink pressed into official paper. A small wooden gavel tapped once. And just like that, the unnamed infant became Lily Harper. He carried her out of the courthouse wrapped in a pale blanket, sunlight catching in her dark lashes. The city noise felt distant, almost muted. She stirred in his arms, letting out a soft breath. He looked down at her and felt something settle into place. Not destiny. Choice. The first nights at home were not gentle. Lily cried often. The sound filled the apartment, bouncing off narrow walls. Daniel paced the living room at 2 in the morning, bare feet against cool floorboards, whispering reassurances into the dim light. Milk warmed in a chipped bottle. A small lamp glowed softly in the corner. Outside, traffic hummed in the distance. He learned quickly how to mix formula without clumping, how to swaddle without too much pressure, how to recognize the difference between hunger and fear. Sleep became fragmented. Work became heavier. But something in him felt lighter. He placed her crib beside his bed at first. He needed to hear her breathing to fall asleep, needed to know she was still there. Weeks turned into months. Her cries softened into coos. Her fingers learned to grip more deliberately. The first time she laughed, it surprised them both. The sound was sudden and bright, like a door opening to sunlight. Daniel laughed too, though tears blurred his vision. Money remained tight. There were nights when he ate less, so Lily's formula could last until payday. Winters felt sharper when he chose a thicker blanket for her instead of himself. He patched worn clothes carefully, mended seams, watched tutorials late at night to learn how to braid hair once her curls began to lengthen. He missed overtime shifts to attend pediatric appointments. He sat through school enrollment paperwork years later with the same steady focus he once gave legal forms. Every sacrifice felt practical, purposeful. When strangers asked questions about resemblance, he smiled and redirected gently. "She takes after her mother," he would say simply. The truth was more complicated than he could explain in passing. The silver bracelet remained in a small wooden box inside his dresser drawer. He did not display it. He did not obsess over it. But he did not discard it either. It was not a threat. It was a reminder that Lily's story began before him. He never spoke of it to her as a burden, only as a beginning. As she grew, she developed habits he could not trace to himself. The way she tilted her head when thinking, the intensity in her gaze when concentrating, a quiet composure beyond her years. Sometimes, watching her, he felt a flicker of awareness that somewhere, someone else might one day see what he saw. He did not dread that day. He prepared for it. Because fatherhood, to him, had never been about possession. It had been about staying. And he had chosen to stay long before anyone asked him to. The corporate headquarters rose from the city like a monument to certainty. Glass and steel caught the morning sun, throwing bright reflections across the sidewalk. Inside, marble floors gleamed beneath towering ceilings. The air smelled faintly of polished stone and something floral drifting from a hidden diffuser. Daniel adjusted the strap of Lily's backpack as they stepped through the revolving doors. The fabric brushed against his knuckles, familiar and worn. Security scanners hummed softly. A badge printer whirred and spat out temporary passes. Lily tilted her head back, eyes wide as she watched the mirrored elevators glide silently up and down the shaft. "It's like being inside a crystal," she whispered. Her voice echoed faintly against the vast lobby. Daniel offered a small smile. He felt out of place in his scuffed shoes and pressed shirt, but Lily stood straight beside him, curious and unafraid. They followed signs toward the exhibition hall, where children's artwork lined pristine white walls. Soft golden lights illuminated each piece, giving crayon and watercolor a kind of reverence. Parents stood nearby in clusters, murmuring encouragement. The faint scent of coffee drifted from a refreshment table in the corner. Lily's painting hung near the center. Daniel stopped when he saw it fully lit. Two worlds divided the canvas. On one side, dark blues and grays formed a stormy skyline, jagged and uncertain. On the other, warm yellows and soft greens stretched into an open field beneath a glowing sky. In the middle stood a small figure holding hands with a taller shadow, protective and steady. At the bottom, in careful but uneven letters, she had written, "Love makes us family." Daniel swallowed quietly. "You did good," he murmured. Lily shifted slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. When she concentrated, she always leaned her head slightly to the left. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. Conversations thinned. Evelyn Carter entered without announcement, yet the room reacted as if something electric had passed through it. Her heels clicked lightly against the floor. The sound carried confidence sharpened by years of command. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, understated but immaculate. A faint trace of jasmine followed her as she moved between displays. Parents straightened. Staff members hovered discreetly at a distance. Evelyn paused before each painting with measured attention. She rarely lingered, until she reached Lily's. Her gaze moved slowly across the canvas. Dark world, bright world, the child between them. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. The words at the bottom seemed to pulse. "Love makes us family." A faint pressure built behind her ribs. She stepped closer. The brush strokes were imperfect, honest. The smaller figure in the center was painted with deliberate care, as though the artist had traced the shape more than once to get it right. Evelyn's eyes lifted from the painting and landed on Lily. The girl stood a few feet away beside Daniel, fingers resting lightly against the strap of her backpack. She was watching the crowd, observing quietly. There was something about the way she held herself, a composure beyond her years. Evelyn felt a subtle shift in her breathing. Lily glanced toward her at that exact moment. Their eyes met. Time thinned. The almond shape, the depth of color, the calm intensity. Lily tilted her head slightly to the left, studying Evelyn with open curiosity. Evelyn mirrored the gesture unconsciously. The symmetry was immediate, unmistakable. A staff member's phone camera clicked faintly from somewhere near the wall, capturing a candid image of CEO and child standing inches apart beneath the glowing artwork. The flash reflected briefly in the polished floor. Evelyn stepped closer without realizing it. "Did you paint this?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Her tone was polite but steady. "What does it mean?" Evelyn asked, though the words already pressed against her mind. Lily glanced back at Daniel before answering. "It means sometimes you start in one place," she said carefully, "but you can belong in another too." Daniel felt the air grow heavier. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the girl's collarbone. There, just above the edge of fabric, faint but visible beneath the exhibition lights. The birthmark. Her pulse faltered. She had seen that shape before. Not on paper, not in photographs, but on a newborn's skin beneath hospital light. For a moment, the gallery sounds dulled into a distant hum. Conversations blurred. The scent of coffee vanished. All she could hear was her own heartbeat. Lily shifted slightly, the strap of her backpack creaking softly. Daniel sensed the change before it became visible. He saw Evelyn's posture stiffen, saw her composure flicker for half a second. The two worlds on the painting suddenly felt less symbolic, less abstract. Evelyn's fingers hovered in the air as if resisting the urge to reach out. She lowered them, deliberately. "How old are you?" she asked. 7, Lily replied. The number landed with quiet force. 7. The exact span of years that had stretched like an unhealed wound in Evelyn's memory. Daniel straightened subtly, positioning himself half a step closer to Lily without making it obvious. Evelyn lifted her eyes to meet his for the first time. The resemblance was no longer a passing thought. It was a fracture spreading beneath carefully constructed glass. The gallery lights hummed overhead. Outside the windows, sunlight glinted against steel towers. Inside, two worlds stood inches apart, and the distance between them had never felt smaller. The exhibition hall had begun to empty, but the air still felt charged. Muted conversations drifted toward the exits. Staff members gathered clipboards. A distant cart rattled softly against polished floors as refreshments were cleared away. Evelyn stood motionless in front of Lily's painting. 7. The number echoed inside her like a tolling bell. She turned slowly toward Daniel, her expression no longer executive, no longer curated. It was searching. "May we speak privately?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Daniel hesitated only a fraction of a second. He crouched to Lily's height, smoothing a stray curl from her cheek. "Stay with Mrs. Alvarez for a moment," he said gently, nodding toward a teacher nearby. Lily looked between them, sensing the gravity but not fully understanding it. She nodded, fingers still resting on the strap of her backpack. Daniel rose. They stepped into a smaller conference room adjacent to the gallery. The door closed with a soft click, sealing them inside. The space smelled faintly of leather and cooling air. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, afternoon light casting long shadows across the table. Evelyn did not sit. Neither did Daniel. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, the question broke through. "Tell me everything." It was not a command. It was desperation restrained by pride. Daniel met her gaze evenly. He had expected anger, accusation, an attempt to assert ownership. Instead, he saw something raw. He exhaled slowly and began. He described the night, the discovery, the process, the waiting, the decision. His words were careful, deliberate, no embellishment, no dramatics. As he spoke, Evelyn's composure deteriorated in quiet stages. Her fingers tightened against the back of a chair, her jaw set. Her breathing grew shallow. When he mentioned the bracelet, she closed her eyes briefly. "I chose it," she said, barely above a whisper. Daniel paused. "The bracelet," she clarified. "The letter." Silence followed. Evelyn moved toward the window, city reflections blurring her outline. "I was told it would be temporary," she said. "I was told it was the only way to protect everything." Her voice did not rise, but something inside it fractured. "I intended to bring her back." Daniel remained still, listening. "The person I trusted handled the arrangements," she continued. "And then the trail vanished." She swallowed. "I searched." The word felt stripped of power. "I spent years searching quietly. If I had made it public, the board would have torn it apart. Investors would have questioned my judgment. The company would have suffered." She turned back to him. "I chose silence over exposure." Daniel absorbed her words without interruption. "You built an empire," he said carefully. "Yes. And in the process," he continued, "you lost her." The truth hung between them. Neither accusation nor absolution. Evelyn did not flinch. "Yes." The single syllable carried 7 years of weight. Outside the glass, traffic moved in silent streams far below. "I never meant to abandon her," she said. Daniel's voice remained steady. "But you did." The honesty did not feel cruel. It felt necessary. Tears pooled in Evelyn's eyes, though she fought them fiercely. "I wake up every day with that knowledge," she replied. Daniel glanced toward the door, imagining Lily's small frame waiting outside. "She doesn't know any of this," he said. "I know. And she doesn't deserve to be caught between regret and reputation." Evelyn stepped back slightly, absorbing the line like a physical blow. For the first time in years, the boardroom persona had no use here. "I don't want to take her from you," she said suddenly. Daniel searched her face for calculation. He found none. "I don't want to erase what you've built with her." The admission seemed to surprise even her. Daniel felt something shift. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Evelyn's gaze drifted back toward the painting visible through the glass wall. "I want a chance," she said. "Not authority. Not control. A chance. To know her, she added. If she wants to know me, the vulnerability in the statement was unfamiliar terrain for her. Daniel studied her carefully. Years of fatigue and sacrifice had sharpened his instincts. He recognized sincerity when he saw it. She's stable, he said. She's loved. She feels safe. Evelyn nodded, blinking back tears. I saw that, and that can't change overnight. It won't, she replied quickly. A pause settled. Daniel's next words carried quiet steel. She is not a headline, he said. Not a liability, not a redemption arc. Evelyn straightened slightly. She's a child, he finished. And any step forward has to protect that first. Evelyn inhaled deeply, steadying herself. If I go public with this, she said slowly, the story will resurface. Questions will follow. About the past, about my decisions. She met his eyes. If I don't, she remains hidden from a part of herself. The choice stood stark between them. Silence or exposure. Reputation or relationship. Daniel spoke carefully. Then this isn't about what's safest for your company. He let the words settle. It's about what's safest for her. Evelyn held his gaze, something resolute forming behind it. For the first time, she said quietly, I'm willing to risk the company. The statement hung in the air like a fragile promise. Daniel felt the shift. The most powerful woman in the building was no longer negotiating leverage. She was confronting loss. He nodded slowly. Then we move carefully, he said. No sudden changes, no cameras, no claims. Evelyn agreed without hesitation. DNA, she added softly. We confirm it properly. Daniel inclined his head. Of course. Outside the conference room, Lily's faint laughter drifted down the hallway, bright and unaware. Both of them turned instinctively toward the sound. In that moment, neither felt like adversaries. They felt like two adults standing at the edge of something delicate and irreversible. Not a battle. A bridge. And neither of them wanted to be the one who set it on fire. The clinic was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Soft lighting, neutral walls, the faint scent of disinfectant barely noticeable beneath filtered air. A muted television in the waiting area displayed a morning news segment with the sound turned off. Daniel sat beside Lily, her small legs swinging slightly above the floor. She watched a fish tank built into the wall, following the slow glide of orange and silver bodies through blue water. Across the room, Evelyn stood near the window, arms folded tightly against herself as though holding something in place. No press. No assistants. No board members. Just 3 people and a question science would answer. A nurse called Lily's name gently. The hallway beyond smelled faintly of alcohol wipes and paper gowns. The door to the testing room clicked shut behind them. Lily glanced up at Daniel. Does this hurt? She asked softly. Just a little pinch, he replied, kneeling so his eyes met hers. I'll be right here. Evelyn stood a few steps away, hands clasped. She watched the nurse prepare the sterile swab and small vial, movements precise and practiced. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. The nurse explained the process calmly, then swabbed the inside of Lily's cheek. Quick, efficient. Lily winced, then relaxed. That's it? She asked. That's it, the nurse smiled. Evelyn stepped forward when asked. The swab brushed her cheek in the same way. 2 sealed envelopes were placed on a small stainless steel tray. Labels printed, barcodes affixed, dates stamped clearly in black ink. The nurse signed her name. A witness countersigned. Chain of custody. Daniel watched every step without blinking. The samples were placed inside a tamper-evident pouch. The seal pressed down with a firm snap. He felt something settle in his chest. This was no longer memory or resemblance. It was documentation. They left the clinic quietly. Outside, the sky hung low and gray. Traffic moved steadily. The world continued. The waiting stretched across several days. Evelyn returned to work, but concentration fractured easily. Meetings blurred. Graphs and projections lost clarity. At night, she stood at the windows of her penthouse, city lights reflecting in the glass. Daniel moved through his routine with Lily as always. Breakfast at the small kitchen table, the smell of toast and brewed coffee filling the apartment, school drop-offs, evening homework. Nothing changed on the surface. Everything shifted underneath. The email arrived mid-morning. Subject line, confidential results. Evelyn stared at it for several seconds before opening it. The PDF loaded slowly. Laboratory header. Case number, date and time logged. She scanned down the page. Probability of maternity, 99.99%. The numbers did not need explanation. Her breath left her in a quiet rush. Across the city, Daniel received the same document. He sat at the edge of his bed, phone in hand, eyes steady as he read the conclusion twice. He did not look surprised. He looked resolved. They met that evening in Evelyn's private office. The blinds were drawn halfway, allowing the last streaks of sunset to filter through. A printed copy of the report lay between them on the desk. Evelyn's fingers rested lightly against the paper, as if grounding herself. "It's confirmed," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Silence filled the space, heavy, but not hostile. Evelyn exhaled. "I thought I was prepared," she admitted. "I wasn't." Daniel considered that. "Neither was I," he replied. The weight of truth felt different now. Solid, undeniable. "I won't contest custody," Evelyn said firmly. "You're her legal father." Daniel studied her expression carefully. "I know that." There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. "I don't want to take her away from the life she knows." The statement landed with sincerity. Daniel felt tension ease slightly from his shoulders. "She deserves stability," he said. "And honesty," Evelyn added. They both understood the complexity of that word. "How do we tell her?" Evelyn asked. Daniel leaned back slightly, thinking. "Slowly," he answered. "In a way she can understand." "She's perceptive," Evelyn said. "She notices more than we think." Daniel allowed a faint smile. "She does." Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Evelyn looked at the DNA report again, then at Daniel. "I spent years building walls," she said quietly. "This changes everything." Daniel shook his head gently. "It doesn't change who she calls Dad." The words held no challenge, only fact. Evelyn absorbed that, nodding once. "I'm not here to replace you," she said. "And I'm not here to erase you," Daniel replied. The agreement was unspoken but solid. A bridge, fragile, yet deliberate. "Publicly," Evelyn began carefully, "this will surface eventually. There's no way to keep something like this contained forever." Daniel understood. "When it does," he said, "it needs to come from you." "Not as scandal," Evelyn added, "as truth." The office felt smaller, more human than it ever had. Evelyn rose and walked toward the window. She placed her palm lightly against the glass. "For 7 years," she said, almost to herself, "I thought the story had ended." Daniel stood as well. "It was just paused," he replied. Behind them, the printed report remained on the desk. Date stamped, signed, verified. Proof of blood, not proof of love. That had already been written elsewhere. And now, with certainty in hand, the future no longer rested on doubt. It rested on choice. The first time Evelyn stepped into Daniel's apartment, she paused just inside the doorway. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something simmering on the stove. The hallway light cast a soft yellow glow against worn walls. Nothing gleamed, nothing echoed. It felt lived in. Her heels sank slightly into the carpet as she moved forward, careful not to seem intrusive. A small bookshelf stood against the wall, filled with mismatched paperbacks and children's stories with creased spines. The refrigerator hummed steadily in the corner of the kitchen, its surface covered in drawings secured by bright magnets. Lily's artwork. Sunsets, stick figures holding hands, a house beneath a sky too wide for the page. Evelyn took it in quietly. Daniel stood a few feet away, posture steady but alert. He had not dressed differently for her visit. No performance. No pretense. Lily emerged from the bedroom at the sound of her name, hair slightly messy from an afternoon of play. When she saw Evelyn, she hesitated only briefly before offering a polite smile. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Evelyn replied gently. Her voice carried none of the authority that ruled boardrooms. It sounded tentative, almost unfamiliar to her own ears. She had brought a gift. A carefully wrapped box rested in her hand, sleek and expensive, the ribbon tied with precision. She knelt to Lily's height and offered it forward. "For you," she said. Lily accepted it carefully, fingers brushing against the smooth paper. She glanced up at Daniel instinctively before opening it. Inside was a beautifully crafted art set, professional grade brushes, rich pigment paints, thick canvas paper. Lily's eyes widened slightly. "It's amazing," she said softly. Evelyn felt a flicker of relief. Then Lily set the box down gently on the coffee table and walked back to Daniel. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his worn shirt. "Can we still use my old crayons too?" she asked quietly. Daniel's hand rested naturally on her back. "Of course," he replied. Evelyn watched the exchange without interruption. There was no rejection in Lily's action, no distance, just clarity. The bond was not fragile. It was rooted. Evelyn understood then that this was not a competition to win affection. It was an invitation to earn presence. She sat down at the small kitchen table when Daniel gestured toward it. The chair creaked faintly beneath her. She noticed the slight wobble in one leg and instinctively steadied herself. They spoke carefully at first. Schedules, boundaries, school events. No overnight stays without discussion. No media exposure. No sudden announcements. Everything deliberate. Everything centered on Lily. As weeks passed, Evelyn's visits became more natural. She learned which shelf held Lily's favorite books. She learned that Lily preferred her toast slightly darker than Daniel did. She learned how to sit cross-legged on the living room floor without worrying about the crease in her trousers. The first time she attended a school recital, she chose a seat near the back. No security detail. No announcement. When Lily stepped onto the stage beneath warm auditorium lights, she searched the audience automatically. Her eyes found Daniel first, then Evelyn. She smiled at both. The applause afterward was ordinary, but for Evelyn it felt seismic. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Evelyn remained at the small kitchen table while Daniel washed dishes at the sink. The clink of ceramic against porcelain filled the quiet. "I want to establish something," Evelyn said carefully. Daniel turned slightly, listening. "A foundation," she clarified. "In her name." He dried his hands slowly before facing her. "For single parents," she continued. "For those who don't have resources, who don't have someone to advocate for them." The idea did not feel like image management. It felt personal. Daniel considered her words. "Public?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, "but not exploitative." He nodded once. "If it helps others," he said, "then it's worth doing." The foundation launched months later with modest press coverage. Evelyn stood before cameras and spoke plainly about mistakes, about fear, about growth. She did not dramatize. She did not deflect. The public response surprised her. There was criticism, yes, but there was also empathy. Parents wrote letters. Single mothers shared stories. Fathers thanked her for acknowledging invisible labor. Meanwhile, Daniel enrolled in evening business classes funded discreetly through the foundation's educational program, not as charity, as partnership. He studied late at night at the same small table, textbooks spread beside Lily's homework. The apartment carried the scent of pencil shavings and brewed coffee. Sometimes Evelyn stayed after dinner and helped Lily with art projects, sleeves rolled up, expensive watch removed and set carefully aside. They did not rush labels. Mother came gradually, softly, not demanded, chosen. One evening, as Lily drifted to sleep, she looked at both of them standing at her doorway. "Are we still a family?" she asked sleepily. Daniel stepped closer. "Yes." Evelyn's voice followed. "Yes." Lily nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. In the quiet hallway, Daniel and Evelyn stood side by side, not as rivals, not as replacements, but as two people who had made different mistakes and different sacrifices, now bound by a shared responsibility neither could carry alone. The bridge between their worlds was not built overnight, but it held, and for the first time neither feared it would collapse. The auditorium lights dimmed slowly, casting the stage in warm gold. Rows of seats stretched toward the back wall, filled with parents, teachers, donors, and students dressed in hopeful anticipation. The faint hum of whispered conversations blended with the soft rustle of programs being folded and unfolded. Backstage, Lily stood near the curtain, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the front of her dress. The fabric shimmered gently under the overhead lights. Her hair, carefully braided, rested over one shoulder. Daniel adjusted his tie for the third time that evening, nerves hidden behind a steady expression. The scent of polished wood and fresh flowers drifted through the hallway. He could hear the low murmur of the crowd beyond the stage. Evelyn stood a few steps away, hands clasped lightly in front of her. She wore no dramatic jewelry, no commanding color, just a simple navy dress and a quiet presence. Years had softened certain edges in her, not her strength, but her isolation. The announcer's voice echoed warmly across the auditorium. And now, our keynote speaker. Applause rolled through the room. Lily inhaled once, steady and deliberate, then stepped into the light. The brightness did not intimidate her. It illuminated her. She approached the microphone and adjusted it slightly downward. The faint feedback hum settled into silence. For a brief moment, she scanned the audience. Her eyes found Daniel first. He offered a small nod, pride shining unguarded in his expression. Then she found Evelyn. Their gazes held for half a heartbeat longer. Lily smiled. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and measured. The room quieted completely. "When I was younger, I painted a picture of two worlds." A soft ripple of recognition passed through those who remembered the story behind the foundation. "I didn't know then that sometimes two worlds can come together." She paused briefly, letting the words settle. "People think family is something simple, that it's about where you start." Her hands rested lightly against the podium, steady. "But I learned it's about who stays, who shows up, who chooses you, even when it's hard." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Evelyn's fingers curled gently around the edge of her program. "I have two parents," Lily continued. "One who held me when I had nothing, and one who found the courage to come back." A quiet shift moved through the audience. Not gossip, not scandal, understanding. "They both made choices," she said, "and those choices built the life I have now." Her eyes shone but did not waver. "Love makes us family." The phrase carried new weight now, no longer written in uneven crayon but spoken with clarity. Applause began softly, then grew, filling the auditorium with warmth. On stage, Lily stepped back from the microphone and bowed her head slightly. As she exited, she moved directly toward Daniel and Evelyn in the front row. Daniel stood first. Evelyn followed. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just a shared understanding of the space they occupied in her life. Lily embraced Daniel tightly, burying her face briefly against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her with quiet strength. Then she turned and hugged Evelyn, not cautiously, fully. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment as she held her daughter, feeling the reality of it in a way that no document or public statement could ever capture. Cameras flashed softly from the back of the room, but the light no longer felt threatening. It felt ordinary. Later, as guests mingled beneath chandeliers and soft music drifted from hidden speakers, Daniel stood near a table of refreshments, speaking with another parent about night classes and small business loans. Across the room, Evelyn listened to a young mother describe how the foundation had helped her keep her apartment during a difficult year. The program had grown quietly, not through spectacle but through consistency. When the crowd thinned and the night began to wind down, the three of them stepped outside together. The city air felt cool and alive. Traffic lights blinked against dark pavement. The skyline shimmered above them. Lily walked between them, one hand in each of theirs. She looked up at the towering buildings. "Do you think," she asked thoughtfully, "that everything happens for a reason?" Daniel considered the question. Evelyn glanced down at her. "Not everything," Daniel answered carefully. "But sometimes," Evelyn added, "we can choose what happens next." Lily seemed satisfied with that. They continued walking beneath the glow of streetlights. Behind them, the auditorium doors closed softly. The past had not disappeared. It never would. But it no longer defined the present. Three lives, once divided by fear and silence, now moved forward in deliberate step. The city lights reflected in glass towers above, and somewhere between them, a bridge held steady.